Missions and Cultural Variability, Part 3, Uncertainty Avoidance and Power Distance. Let's rehearse briefly what we've already learned about cultural variability. Cultural variability in communication is how people's cultures affect the way they communicate. To study cultural variability requires that we use a degree of stereotyping because not everybody within a culture is going to behave the same way. We also have to use a combination of the different variability aspects if we're going to fully understand communication within a given culture. And it's important that we understand cultural variability and its effect on communication in order to be able to very effectively and efficiently communicate the gospel within different cultures. In this lecture, we're going to look first at the cultural variable of uncertainty avoidance. There are cultures that are more oriented towards uncertainty than others. Some cultures tend to avoid uncertain situations. And cultures that avoid uncertainty tend to attempt to avoid unstructured situations. They like routine. They like operating in a realm that's known to them. In cultures that accept uncertainty, there is more tolerance of differences of opinions. There are fewer rules, and people tend to be less emotionally, or at least less expressive in their emotions. Cultures that are high context also tend to be cultures that avoid uncertainty. And cultures that are low context seem to have a greater tolerance for uncertain situations. According to research by Tuleja and O'Rourke, cultures that are low in uncertainty avoidance, cultures that don't seem to mind uncertain situations, such as the culture in the United States of America, deal with uncertainty through coping mechanisms they've built, such as technology, law, and religion. But high uncertainty avoidance cultures, such as cultures you would find in Latin America, tend to deal with uncertainty through rules and very strict codes of behavior, cultural norms, that are used to try to prevent unstructured situations from arising. So low uncertainty avoidant cultures deal with uncertain situations as they come up. High uncertainty avoidance cultures tend to try to prevent those unstructured situations from happening. The motto of high uncertainty avoidant cultures might be expressed simply as what is different is dangerous. In high uncertainty avoidant cultures, such as Latin America, you'll find that people favor the in-group. We've already discussed this in a previous lecture. And people are very cautious about opening themselves up to get to know people outside of that in-group, which also, of course, presents a challenge to the missionary. These cultures that are highly uncertainty avoidant also tend to be collectivist cultures. And so they emphasize the importance of building relationships. And the relationships that they build are based on connections that they have within the greater community. The more connected you are, the more influence you tend to exert. In these connections and establishing these connections, much importance is paid to social status and family origin. How does this affect our jobs as missionaries? We should understand how uncertainty avoidance will affect people's behavior if we're going to be really effective in reaching them with the gospel. So people from highly uncertainty avoidant cultures are probably going to be very loyal to their traditional religions, at least in the beginning. If you're working in Latin America, you'll find people are very, very loyal to the Roman Catholic Church. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of work to break through those defenses and overcome that loyalty. So the place to start is through building relationships and winning people's confidence. And another thing that's very helpful is to show that the Apostolic Church is very large and has a worldwide presence. The reason this is important is that in uncertainty avoidant cultures, people have a great respect towards age and tradition, and they feel like things that are old and established may be safer than something that has a shorter history and hasn't been around as long. Power distance is another cultural variable that's very important. Power distance is simply the willingness of organizations or institutions to concede or expect that power is not distributed equally. Some cultures are more oriented towards being egalitarian, everybody being equal. For example, the culture in the United States is very egalitarian. Other cultures, especially in Latin America, Asia, other areas of the world that are high context collectivist, people also tend to accept the fact that men aren't necessarily created equal, that there are different levels of social status and different levels of power in society. In my own personal experience, I've found that in these collectivist cultures, power distance is not limited just to organizations or institutions, but it's a reality at the level of the individual as well. And generally, you're going to find that cultures in Western and Northern Europe are low power distance, as is the culture here in the United States of America. Cultures that are Mediterranean, Asian, or Latin American tend to be high power distance. Power distance can be a real consideration to the work of the missionary as well. When foreigners from North America go to the mission field, a lot of times people automatically afford them a certain degree of respect or deference, and this isn't always true. Foreigners are not always, particularly Americans, are not always well received, but in the places where they are, they tend to automatically be given a certain level of status. This can be helpful to a missionary's work. People may more readily accept their word, unquestionably, just because they feel like this missionary, by virtue of being from another country, perhaps the United States, perhaps Canada, they feel like this missionary is automatically better educated than a lot of people in their own countries. But this can also be harmful because the very faith that people place in the missionary causes a great ethical burden. It causes the missionary to be very, very careful with everything that he says or does because of the fact that people are likely to believe what's said just on the basis of who the missionary is. And an illustration to this, I remember a missionary telling me years ago, she was a missionary's daughter, and she told me that she was working in a country where people's skin tends to be dark complected. She was a very light complected individual, and one of the pastors asked her what he could do to help his wife have light complected skin like she had, and thinking he was joking, she lightheartedly remarked, "Well, tell her to bathe in hydrochloric acid." And the pastor left, and a few minutes later she had a terrible feeling that he had taken her seriously, and she ran to his house, and sure enough, he was in the act of filling a tub with hydrochloric acid in preparation for his wife to bathe in that substance. And so that's an extreme example, but it goes to illustrate the fact that people do take seriously what we say, and we should always be very careful that we're pointing them in the right direction, particularly in the case of the gospel, because they are likely to believe just because we said it. Another drawback of power distance is that it can make people less willing to be open in discussing problems they perceive or to offer constructive criticism. And this can really affect the work of the church, because this reluctance to do what the individual from that culture might perceive as being a challenge to power can also limit the effectiveness of the missionary in the church, because We simply don't know that some things we're doing are not effective, or not productive, or not efficient within that culture. And so we really do need to hear feedback from the people that we're working with, and we need to be aware that because of power distance, they may be reluctant to give us that feedback. So we have to reach for it a little harder and let them know that it's okay to share with us when they perceive that things could be improved.